Shalom, hello, Erev Tov, Zorayim Tovim, good morning. Welcome to our webinar, live webinar, another in our series we've been doing for years now here in the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel, HaChavra L'Haganat Hateva. I'm Jay Shofet. I'm coming to you live from Tel Aviv, my home, and we have a very interesting webinar tonight, something a little different, and in the spirit of the Chag, in the spirit of the Tu B'Shvat holiday, which is upon us 1 week from today, 1 week from this moment in Israel tonight, and we're going to be talking to Nigel Savage, veteran environmentalist, activist, and leader. We'll hear about Nigel and meet him in just a minute. Meanwhile, welcome everybody. We're getting already close to 100 participants and appreciate it. Let us know in the chat where you're from. Good evening from Norway. Yes, good evening. Nigel is coming to us from London. I'm here in Tel Aviv. David Amichai doing back office for us tonight. Our regular Naama Gat is home under the weather, but David is filling in from Jerusalem. Hello, David Amichai. Hello from Valencia, Spain, Virginia. Snowy Newton, Mass. What's going on with the storm over there in the nor'easter? I haven't been on top of the weather today in New York, but it was looking bad yesterday. Wow, we're getting people from Vancouver and Florida and all over Michigan and Toronto. Shalom from the Hudson Valley, my home area, my favorite spot on earth, next to Tel Aviv. And it's really, the world should be the Hudson Valley. Olympia, Washington. Great to see everybody here. Milwaukee, Sweden, Malvern. Some of my best friends grew up in Malvern. Beersheba and Johannesburg and Atlanta. Really appreciate everybody joining for today. I think we're going to get going in just a minute. People have joined. We're over 100 people now. Shalom from Berlin. I don't know if we noticed anybody from down under. I think it's nighttime there. But Yossi and Ranana and Beersheba, we really have most of the continents represented here. So let me welcome Nigel Savage. Uh, Nigel, hello. How are you?
Hi, Jay. Nice to see you. How are you?
Really good to see you. It's great to have you here. I've wanted this for a while. Nigel has been somewhat a hero of mine for longer than he knows. I think before I met him, I knew of him and have met him over the years, but he keeps morphing and growing and made Aliyah a couple of years ago. And I think we'll get underway. What's going to happen tonight is I'm going to introduce Nigel more formally. Um, and then we're going to just talk about Tu B'Shvat. Here's some of Nigel's impressions, thoughts, and about the history and the meaning of Tu B'Shvat. And it's something I'll be giving a webinar on a week from now from our perspective, not exactly about Tu B'Shvat per se, but more about Israel's afforestation policies as we see them. Um, and it's one in this series. We're very proud and happy to have Nigel with us. Um, Nigel began his first career in finance in London, where by the way he is tonight, and just learned he's from Manchester, which apparently is in a important game in the whatever cup they're doing in that football game. I have my New England Patriots coming up right after this webinar, so it's interesting how they always time Tu B'Shvat that way. Um, London, Nigel founded Hazon in the States. Today it's called Adamah. It was a growing organization which, under his leadership, became the largest environmental organization in the American Jewish community. In 2021, he stepped down to move to Jerusalem, where he's now based. And he is the founding CEO of the JCT, the Jewish Climate Trust. It's a new think and do tank, new a couple of years old now or more, think and do tank that's working to improve the performance of the Jewish people on climate change issues. Few things are more important, I would say, to the future of humanity on the globe and to the future of the Jewish community. Nigel, you've been in positions of activism and leadership for over 2 decades now, as I count it. in the Jewish environmental space. In that time, I imagine you've thought a lot about the connection between the Jewish sources, Jewish history, the Jewish present, and this natural environment that we live in. So I can't wait to hear your thoughts tonight. Nigel, we're just going to be in conversation tonight, folks. There's no presentation coming. So please let us know if you have questions for Nigel as they come up. Better to put them in the chat in the question and answer feature of Zoom. I'll try to find them if they're in chat as well, but we'll get, 40, 45 minutes into it. We'll get to some of the questions. Unless, by the way, Nigel, I need to interject if there's some urgent issue that we didn't understand or something. Thank you. So, how about we start, Nigel, with anything you'd like to say as an introduction and introducing yourself, and then get right into the history of Tu B'Shvat.
I think I'll just say a couple of things. First of all, Jay, just thank you for having me. I'm super happy to be here. I'm honored to be here. I want to say back at you some of the nice things that you said about me. And I think I also want to say one of the things that I think is most interesting nowadays is the relationship between being out in the natural world and actually affecting difference. And affecting difference sometimes doesn't involve being in the natural world. There are a series of policies or other things that we could be involved in. But I just want to note that one of the key moments for me, I'd taken a year off from my first career. I was learning at Pardes in Jerusalem at Coed Yeshiva, and a friend invited me on a sea-to-sea hike from Achsiv on the Mediterranean coast to the Sea of Galilee. And I said yes. I wasn't really thinking about it. It was guys. I was the oldest guy. And 5 weeks later, I was stood in the center of Jerusalem on the foot of the Midrachov in pelting rain with an incredibly heavy backpack on my back, totally unsuitable footwear, thinking, Nige, dreadful mistake. What were you thinking about? And I was sort of from the chubby, nerdy, intellectual wing of the English Jewish community. I'd not really set foot outdoors. And I was really
Mhm.
nervous. And we had this amazing hike. It was really, really powerful, beautiful. I saw that it was good to push oneself physically. I saw that it was an amazing way to bring people together across difference. And I saw also the Jewish people didn't enter human history in a synagogue, a Bet Midrash, a JCC, a day school. We entered human history as indigenous people, with, like all indigenous peoples, a relationship to land, language, life cycle, weather, food. And the Torah is a record of these things. We've traveled through all these countries, all these centuries, and it's the same Torah in the most extreme ultra Orthodox synagogue, in the most renewal shul. The later work that I did at Hazon, which is now Adamah, and which I'm doing now at Jewish Climate Trust, it's not clear that that would have happened had I not gone on that hike that day. And that hike rests on a base of work that SPNI, Haganat HaTeva, and other organizations have done to help generations of Israelis, generations of visitors to Israel, to step out of the cities, to step out of our cars, to step out of our hotels, actually engage with the natural world. And so it's a genuine, it's not just that I'm happy and honored to be, but it really is a thank you to SPNI and to all of the people today, but all of the people who came before you, who have helped to do the work that lets people, including me, benefit from it.
Well, thank you very much. That's very touching, and I really appreciated that your introductory points about, yeah, the history of Tu B'Shvat, and yeah, amazing. Thank you, Nigel. With the
That's
keeping the
not the
natural,
his. That's
not
not the history of Tu B'Shvat. We haven't
no,
done
not
that yet.
yeah. So no, I didn't mean that. I meant, yeah, your the history of your um this nerdy Jewish London British boy and this hike. I was in Achziv just a couple weeks ago, and we talked about we dedicated some benches there. We had a donation, and it really is a great jumping off point for that great hike that means a lot to a lot of people. That C2C hike, one of the 11,000 part of the 11,000 kilometers of hiking trails in Israel that
Huh.
we blaze and maintain.
Cool. Very cool.
So the history of Tu B'Shvat is on the agenda. And, because it feels a little bit like the history of Tu B'Shvat's a little bit like the Blind Man and the Elephant. I've heard all kinds of Bonagid emphases on how where it came from and what it developed. It's one of four Jewish New Years in the Torah, as I understand. And why has this one become, next to Rosh Hashanah, our top New Year?
So I really love Tu B'Shvat. I mean, I really do. Um, and I want to say also at the start, I loved it even before 8 years ago. 8 years ago, we were on vacation in South Africa, and we had arrived that morning in Johannesburg, and we went to the Mandela Museum, and then it was Tu B'Shvat, and I had looked online beforehand, and there was a Tu B'Shvat Seder in a park in Johannesburg, and we went there. It was one of the most amazing Tu B'Shvat Seders I've ever been in. It was this extraordinary park. It was a natural landscape that I'd never seen before in my life. Included a very, very long silent meditation walk. And I was doing this thinking about my dad, who I'd been seeing in Manchester the week before, who was really declining. And we did this and we got back to the hotel late and tired. We were leaving early the next day to go on safari. And 5 minutes after we got back, my mum phoned to say that my father had just died. And
Oh,
my father, in fact, died while I was in that Tu B'Shvat Seder in Johannesburg on Tu B'Shvat. That was 8 years ago. So I'd love Tu B'Shvat to start with, but I actually want to dedicate this today in memory of my dad, Jerry Savage, Gedalia Ben Avram Marie, who was a very lovely man.
wow.
So yeah, let me say a word about the history of Tu B'Shvat. So Tu B'Shvat really starts off as the tax year. Originally, we were an agrarian people, and we're taking up tithes, which is to say a tax, to the temple in Jerusalem. And the question is, well, when does the year begin and when does it end? And the answer was Tu B'Shvat, which was the new year for trees. Before Tu B'Shvat, it's 1 year. After Tu B'Shvat, it's the next year. So after the destruction of the Second Temple, which is, 19 centuries ago, really Tu B'Shvat should have gone out of history. We weren't going to the temple. We weren't bringing offerings. But in a very Jewish way, it remained in the Mishnah. We told the story of Tu B'Shvat, even though we didn't observe it. And so 14 centuries later, you have the expulsion from Spain. And some of the people expelled from Spain ended up in Sfat in northern Israel. And then the Kabbalists of Sfat, then sticks. They're the people who created Lecha Dodi, if anybody here has ever sung Lecha Dodi on Friday night. And we often think that it's only this generation that has been liturgically creative in Jewish life. But some unknown person in Sfat 600 years ago must have said, hey, it's Tu B'Shvat, it's in the Mishnah, let's do something. What shall we do? And Tu B'Shvat is the 15th of Shvat. It's on the full moon of the month of Shvat. 2 months later to the day is the full moon of Nisan, which is Seder night, which is the start of Pesach. And so somebody must have said, well, we have a Seder on Pesach, let's have a Seder on Tu B'Shvat. Well, what should we do? Well, we have 4 cups of wine at a Pesach Seder. Let's have 4 cups of wine at a Tu B'Shvat Seder. Well, we have a Hag for the Pesach Seder. We have a sort of order of ceremonies. Let's have a kind of order of ceremonies. The notion of a Tu B'Shvat Seder dates essentially from the Kabbalists of Sfat, who really created it. They were really being creative. And it's clear that they were doing something that also goes to SPNI and Jewish Climate Trust together, which was that they were, in a sense, riffing on the relationship between what it meant to be Jewish and respecting the tradition and those who came before them, and what it meant to physically engage with the natural world, with the land of Israel, which they were reconnecting with. So that's the second phase of Tu B'Shvat. The third phase is really the secular Zionists in the 19th century, the beginnings of JNF, the Chalotzim, planting trees. I grew up in Manchester getting JNF tree certificates on Tu B'Shvat. That was the kind of third phase of Tu B'Shvat, and it's not minor that I think the state of Israel is one of a tiny handful of states that ended the 20th century with more trees
Wait.
than it began, which is kind of remarkable. And it's testament to that centrality of trees within Jewish life and planting the land. As you may end up saying later, some of us later on have learned they weren't necessarily the right trees. There's been some corrective action that's needed. And the fourth phase of action dates back to a phase of Tu B'Shvat goes to 1970. 1970 was Earth Day. And we think that the first sort of contemporary environmental Tu B'Shvat Seder was a group of Reform rabbinical students that year who, in the aftermath of Earth Day, were saying, oh, okay, how are we going to connect that Jewishly? Where do we put this in the tradition? Oh, we have Tu B'Shvat. It was in the Mishnah, it's the Kabbalists, it's the secular Zionists. Now it's the end of the 20th century, the start of the 21st century. How can we reinfuse this holiday, or looked at the other way around, how can we enable this holiday to infuse us with a sense of connectedness to the world that sustains us? And so that's sort of the history and the present of Tu B'Shvat, and the future of it is going to be up to all of us.
Wow, that's very interesting. I have a quick question and a quick comment, which is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. The question is, okay, so you started with it's the tax year, but why did they choose the Jewish New Year for trees? Why not just go with Rosh Hashanah for being the tax year, for example?
It's an absolutely great question. I have no idea. I literally have no idea. I mean,
Okay.
I think it may be, if I had to guess, two different things. One is wanting a certain kind of distinctiveness. The tradition likes distinctiveness, and Rosh Hashanah has enough going on within Rosh Hashanah. You can imagine them not wanting to add something to it. But the second thing, which is really particularly lovely in Israel, it's a bit less true, honestly, in Manchester and some other places. This is the time you start to see the buds on the tree.
Right.
It's literally Tu B'Shvat, and you start to see it. And we forget that the fall and the winter is a certain kind of death, right? And like things are dying, things are falling off, and you can imagine an ancient sense of, is the world going to end? Are the days just going to keep on getting darker? And Hanukkah is about light coming out of the darkness and the days starting to get longer again. And Tu B'Shvat, right after Hanukkah, is about, oh, there are buds on the trees. It's the start of a new year.
It's the sign of spring in the dead of
Yeah,
winter. It's
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
My other thing is that I was an Israel Aliyah emissary in Boston in the mid '90s, and I worked part-time with Young Judea, great youth movement in the States. This non-denominational centrist youth movement. I learned a lot from them. I didn't grow up in Young Judea at all, but we did Tu B'Shvat seders, and I know that it's very popular. Those four glasses of wine or grape juice, and I know that we have educational materials, SPNI for Tu B'Shvat now in English on our site, which we send out to rabbis and includes a Tu B'Shvat Seder, which includes four glasses of wine. We did Seders back in the 90s with a glass of water, of course, so crucial to Israeli existence, a glass of milk, the land of, a glass of orange juice. I guess in the modern era of Tu B'Shvat, that was one of our first agricultural exports, and then a glass of wine, of course, because wine is crucial, sacramental, and the wine industry today is, putting Israel on the map. So I
Yeah,
like that period. It's also more kid friendly. So that's what
agreed.
I'm recommending for Tu B'Shvat Seders. So wow, okay, Nigel. So um, you're really an interesting hybrid of a Jewish environmental activist and just a diehard environmental activist. How does that mesh on Tu B'Shvat? What does it mean today? Is it part of the year? Has it been part of your cycle of work in Hazon and Adamah over the years? And where is it today with the Jewish Climate Trust? And obviously, and we're not talking just about the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, but clue us into environmentally what's been going on and how this relates.
Yeah. So part of this is thinking a little bit of what is the purpose of every holiday in the Jewish calendar? I think that properly understood, every holiday comes to remind us of something that ideally we should be thinking about the whole year round. So the whole year round, we should be trying to be the best person that we can be. But if we forget the period around Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the period of tshuva, the period of repentance or returning to our best selves, comes to remind us of that. And really, every day of the year, we should be trying to get rid of stuff that we don't need. But if we forget the period from Purim to Pesach, when we start to get rid of our chametz, our superfluity, not just literally our breadcrumbs, but just stuff that we don't need, that period comes to remind us. And so I think that Tu B'Shvat comes to remind us that every day of the year, we should be thinking about the fact that everything that we have is dependent on the natural world. And so certainly for the Jewish environmental organizations, including Adamah in the States, including Haganat HaTeva in Israel, including a load of different organizations, Tu B'Shvat simply becomes a moment to say to people, here is a moment when Jewish tradition gives you the gift of wanting to think about what sustains us and what we want to do about it. So one of the things that I want to say is that Tu B'Shvat this year is next Sunday evening and Monday. And it's always nice when it falls on a Sunday evening because people are at home, they're not at work. And the Tu B'Shvat Seder, in my view, and there are loads of materials online, and nowadays it's kind of fun, you can find interesting stuff. But I think a Tu B'Shvat Seder should be real. I don't think a Tu B'Shvat Seder has to be 4 glasses of wine and it doesn't have to be fruits and nuts. But I think a Tu B'Shvat Seder next Sunday evening is to have dinner with your family, with your friends, with close friends, with people that you haven't seen for a while, and actually put some fruit and vegetables on the table, maybe some that are indigenous to the land of Israel, maybe some that are indigenous to where you are living, anywhere on planet Earth, and actually have a conversation about how you're at the moment, right? Have a conversation about the places that you love in the natural world. Have a conversation about a time that you felt connected to things. And then also have a conversation about perhaps feeling bad about some of the things that are going on, and yet, in a sense, not being bowed down by it. And I think part of playing Tu B'Shvat forwards is about thinking about, are there ways that any of us can try and make a difference for good in the future? And I don't think there's a single answer to that, but I think that's part of the way that Tu B'Shvat can be a stepping stone to learning and to action in the world that we're in right now. And I think I also want to say, look, before I say any more, I think I want to let you say a couple of things about Haganat HaTeva, SPNI, maybe about how it has evolved over how it is different than it is today, maybe, maybe in general or in relationship to Tu B'Shvat itself.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'll just say briefly, I mean, I'll give a plug to our webinar next week, same time, same channel, uh, which is about we every Tu B'Shvat now for the last few years we do a campaign, a fundraising campaign and a public information campaign about planting mindfully. We're not against tree planting, of course. I mean, trees are incredible and they're also important for for the ecosystem and to sequester carbon. But afforestation is a different question, and we have some serious questions about Israel's afforestation policies over the years, uh, how Israel and where Israel has planted its forests. We're part of there's I don't know if you know, but Israel has Tamot, master plans for all kinds of things in the country, for renewable energy, for infrastructure. And we have a TAMA, a master plan for forests, for afforestation. And it's mostly filled in. And then there's a lot of blank spaces, which are intended in the future to be forested land. And we don't believe that we need any more planted forests in Israel. Um, for a variety of reasons. I mean, mostly because it's not appropriate to most of the habitat in Israel. Habitat in Israel tends to be scrubland, a unique Mediterranean scrubland called bata, and and it's not a naturally there's some horshot, some woodlands, but it's not a naturally forested area. And the biodiversity of the area has changed and changed dramatically, and it spills into the adjacent areas. And so we think we should basically end deforestation and plant trees mindfully. We plant trees in SPNI individually and sparsely to attract wildlife and provide food for for biodiversity in our wetland habitats. We plant for shade on our field school campuses and in cities, in urban nature sites for both of those reasons. But afforestation is not something we do. And, Tu B'Shvat is the hook for us because it is the time when, for your bar mitzvah and my bar mitzvah, and basically everybody's bar mitzvah, and other smachot, trees are planted by the JNFKKL, Karen Kayemet, in these places. And that's still going on. And every time, after forest fires, there's calls to replant. And we don't need to replant after forest fires. Those pine forests are built to survive forest fires and thrive and come back denser than they were in the first place, which is what has happened, for example, after it was the Hanukkah fires in, I never remember the year, the really tragic Carmel fire, at least 15, 18 years ago. And those trees came back much denser. But Tu B'Shvat's just a hook for us. I mean, it's a great holiday. It's a holiday. It reminds us of nature. It was the first holiday when we've revamped our American Friends of organization. It's called Nature Israel now. It's a much bigger and more active, expanded board and professional staff. And when they started to look at the holidays to provide educational materials for, Tu B'Shvat was our first go-to holiday. It's a great moment, as you pointed out, to kind of pause and think about the environment. And when you were talking about the Tu B'Shvat Seder, about the reflection and the family, I wanted to get to the activism part, and you did, because it really is. I mean, Tu B'Shvat is a great call to action, and that's what what happened in the 1970s when that movement got started in the States. And whenever anybody mentions that, I always point out that SPNI was founded in 1953, not just before the activism in the States from the 70s, but a decade almost before Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, which in many ways and to many historians was the kickoff of environmental consciousness in the States in a very broad way. When we realized about DDT and the environment and things that are so basic to us today. Um, but the local kibbutznikim and scientists in Israel that founded SPNI as a protest to the draining of the Chula swamps in 1953 because they thought it would be an ecological disaster for biodiversity and for the quality and quantity of water in the Kinneret. They were correct, and on their backs, SPNI was created, and so it's we have a long history and of being connected to this land in very deep ways. So
Absolutely. And I think I also just want to add, as you were saying that, I'm also visualizing some of the people on this call. And I want to give a little shout out to Jonathan Wolf, who I think is here, and both he and his late father, Zichrono Livracha, were involved in the very early days of Tu B'Shvat, literally the contemporary celebration of Tu B'Shvat in the United States 50 years ago. I think David Krantz has been here, who's been a key leader of 8SIM. He was giving a shout out to Alon Tal's All the Trees of the Forest. But I'm really thrilled that all of these people could join us. And one of the things that's lovely is that the of people who care about these issues and who are getting involved in them continues to grow. It's important that they do so.
absolutely. Thanks. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about the Jewish Climate Trust. And
Sure. So I'll say a couple of things about Jewish Climate Trust, and actually just one specific thing that's been going on this week that involves SPNI and Jewish Climate Trust together. Jewish Climate Trust really arose from Stephen Bronfman. And Stephen, wearing one hat, has been involved in Jewish life all of his adult life. And separately, he's a really serious environmentalist, and he sits on the board of the Suzuki Foundation, which is one of the leading environmental organizations in Canada. And he came to me 2 or 3 years ago and said, my father was involved in founding Birthright. That was his legacy project, today a huge organization. And I'm going to be 60 next, thinking about what my legacy project is or might be. Help me figure that out. Maybe something to do with environment, climate, Jewish, Israel. And that was kind of fun for me. And Stephen and I went and spoke to a bunch of people. And one of the things that became clear is that there were lots of individual organizations doing good and specific things, but that there was no specific organization working across the Jewish world, both in Israel and in the diaspora, to try and rally the Jewish people to make a difference on climate. And so Stephen said, okay, I'll put some money in if you can raise some more. We did that and we started work July 1st, 2024. So we just finished our first year of existence, full year of existence, going into our second. The question that we had to ask ourselves was, well, it's great to say we want to improve the performance of Israel and the Jewish people on climate, but what does that mean in practice? And we said basically it means three things. Number one is actually trying to help improve the direct impact of the Jewish people and the state of Israel on mitigation and adaptation, as it were, inside our borders. Number two, anything we do, we want to make on climate, but wherever possible, additionally, we want to have co-benefits. Can we, as well as making a difference on climate, help to strengthen the Jewish community or Israel-diaspora relations or Israel and its neighbors? And point three, even if we got the Jewish people to net zero tomorrow, we're 0.2% of planet Earth, right? It wouldn't change the trajectory for the planet. So wherever we can, we're actually interested in, are there ways to have larger impact? And I'll just give you a couple of examples of things that we're doing. And we've been working closely. We've helped them accelerate a Jewish climate leadership action plan, action network for institutions in the Jewish community. We've helped to launch a Jewish Green Business Network. We're interested in supporting interfaith work. In Israel, we've been very interested in cross-border work. Despite everything, the Center for Applied Environmental Diplomacy at the Institute has done remarkable work since 2014 with Palestinians and Jordanians. Those relationships survived the last 2 years, since October 7, and yet their largest funder was USAID, and they were facing some real challenges, and we stepped in to try and help them. And within Israel, one of the things that I think we're going to end up working probably with SPNI is just thinking about change that is coming down the pike. The Palisades fires in LA last year were a failure of catastrophe planning. People just weren't. October the 7th was a failure of catastrophe planning. People were not thinking of risks that could happen. So we're starting to think about the world is heating up, the Middle East is heating up even more, extreme weather events are heating up even more. What can, could, or should we all be doing about it? So that's some general stuff. But I just want to add one specific thing from this week, which is kind of fascinating. It came out in the press that Gideon Saar, who is Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs, had asked his people to think about pulling out of the UN Climate Convention, which Israel is party to, which commits Israel to reduce greenhouse gases by 27% by 2030, a series of other things. It is really, really important that Israel remain in that. And essentially, a team of 5 people stepped in, I think, this week behind the scenes to try and make a difference. One of them was Jonathan Baum from Chaim V'Sviva, who used to be at Greenpeace. Tamar Zandberg, many people know, the former environment minister who's now running a think tank at Ben Gurion, the chair of Chaim V'Sviva. And then 2 of them were Gittit and I always mess up his name, Boimer. What's his name?
Dror Boimel
Dror.
and Yitit Weisbaum, yeah.
That's right. With Galit Cohen, who's my Israel director, who was previously Director General. And the 5 of them came together this week and I think worked very effectively, both publicly and privately behind the scenes, to really argue forcefully for Israel remaining within that climate convention. And it's very important. And I hope that they've been successful and will be successful going forwards.
I mean, it's almost absurd that needs to happen this today. And you know, I mean, crazy. And by the way, Galit Cohen, you mentioned she was the former Director General of the Environment Ministry
Yes.
under Tamar Zandberg, and she's a longtime professional in the environmental ministry. So that's a great hire on your part.
Yeah.
And you know, yeah, the Well, we won't get into the environmental ministry right now.
We won't.
Yeah.
I will just say, look, I also will say, it was just interesting for me last year going to Magan Michal. Some people have been there. I was there years ago in the days of the fish farms, and it's one of the places I think is doing wilding stuff. And I just think that that work is important. It is also that I think there has to be a relationship right now between practical next steps, things that can make a difference, and actually having a sense of hope. This is a very complicated moment right now in the United States, in Israel, in Britain, in Canada, in Greenland. Um, there's a lot of complicated stuff going on in the world. And part of, I think, the lesson of Jewish tradition and all of the Jewish holidays is this extraordinary mixing together of symbolism, celebration, things that at some level are fun or engaging or pointed at kids or celebratory or whatever, with actually having impact in the world. And I think it's actually important for each one of us, wherever we are, to be able to modulate that balance. And I think that's what those 5 people were doing this week. They were something's going on here where we need to try and make a difference. They were doing so with a sense of determination, a sense of possibility, a sense of hope. They weren't screaming, they weren't giving up. They weren't just doing it by themselves, but they were saying, oh, we actually have power to make things better. That's an important part of every Jewish holiday, and it's an important part of Tu B'Shvat.
That's very interesting, incredible, and it's great that we have your former colleagues. And I mean, Jonathan Wolf. I'm just reading his comment now. 50th anniversary of the first Jewish Fad Seder. Wow, that's quite an achievement and quite a momentous moment we're here in the 50th anniversary. Very interesting. Um, what I mean, what can we say about how we're doing in the first part? You said there were 3 areas that JCT wanted to talk about, and the first is mitigation and adaptation within Israel. How do you think we're doing in that? And especially in the last, couple years, the trajectory, what are the biggest challenges there?
Look, the challenges are things that we know, which is this holy crisis that we're in right now. People feel overwhelmed. There is too much going on. Right? Israel has been at war. The American Jewish community is facing a really changed environment. And I think against that backdrop, there are a lot of Jewish leaders, maybe a lot of just Jewish people individually, who would say, look, I'm not a climate denier. I feel bad about some of these things that are going on. But seriously, we just have finite amount of time. We have amount of energy or money. And what can I do about that? To those people, I think I would say, first of all, I hear you. Like, I actually understand that. That's legitimate. And secondly, of course, the famous lines from Pirkei Avot, which some of us grow up with, ethics of the ancestors, part of the Mishnah. You're not required to complete the task, but neither can you desist from it. And the line is like a cliche, right? It's a lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, lo alecha. Some people will be familiar with that.
Many.
And yet those words speak to this moment. They speak to a moment of, well, okay, I'm not required to complete the task, but what can I or we do? Well, could we make sure that we have a compost at home or in a place of work or in our law firm or at our hillel? Could we, in the United States, invite somebody from Adamah or SPNI to come and speak and teach about doing, or could they be doing? Could we in Israel, as we go into election year, be encouraging all of the parties, regardless of your personal politics, if you're left or right, you're religious, you're not religious, whoever your slave is, you kind of should be saying to people, oh, as well as everything else, this is a small, hot, dry part of the world. We've got 10 million people already. We're going to be 15 or 16 million people 20 years from now. This stuff is important. This is not an optional extra, right? Making a difference on this is crucial. And I think being interested and willing to step beyond one's sense of disempowerment, simply begin, is part of, that's why every holiday comes to say to us, get started. Like, just get started.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and we're never going to finish the task, and that task will never be finished, perhaps. I don't know, when we go to zero carbon at some point in the future, who knows? Um, in the meanwhile, AI and crypto and a lot of things are causing, more energy needs in Israel, and um, there are a lot of challenges on the ground. I mean, and when you talk about the electorate, and it's kind of what people forget about. Oh yeah, I can reduce my carbon footprint and I can help support organizations that do that. Um, but people forget about the power of the ballot box. But the problem is, what if there's no one to vote for? Or what if the environmental agenda is so low on the priority list of, for example, Israel? And, you know, I mean, America's not that different. It's just there's so many other crowded issues on the agenda. What can one do politically?
So, first of all, I think it was important to start locally and to want to build relationships. And I think there is always an opportunity, for example, in the United States, to have some synagogues or Jewish institutions come together across difference and host an event for local elected officials between elections running up to a next cycle and say, here we are with the Jewish community and we care about things and we want to have a ball or an evening on certain sorts of things. I think people often give almost formulaic answers when they're asked about anti-Semitism or Israel. And I think the notion of the Jewish community or coming together with other faith communities and actually starting a conversation about environmental issues locally, in a state, nationally, I think that that's always doable, and always worth doing, truthfully.
Interesting. Um, well, we have a bunch of questions here. Shmuel Yerushalmi asked in the beginning, I think you pretty much answered about when Tu B'Shvat became the patriotic celebration of strong and a connection to the land, or strong and a special connection of the people of Israel to the land of Israel. Um, you want to take that again? And he asks, and what about the connection between Tu B'Shvat and the agricultural calendar in Eretz Israel? I mean, it's the beginning of the blossoming, but is that an agricultural moment?
So it's certainly an agricultural moment. And again, for people who are interested in it, what an amazing thing next Sunday night to have a meal and have a conversation about where everything on your plate came from. And you could go out and specially buy things that grow in Israel or grow locally, but you could also have whatever is the commonest meal that you have at home with your family. Do you have cheese on toast? Do you have fish and chips? Do you have whatever it may be? And what is this? Where did this come from? What grew where? What lived? How did it live? How did it die? Who are the people who I think may have worked on it? How did it get to my plate? How are the people treated? How are the animals treated? What has been the ecological impact? And the notion of asking questions as real questions, not as rhetorical questions, not to sort of bang people over the head, but with a sense of curiosity. One of the things that I love about Jewish tradition is that we really believe that learning leads to action. Just allowing Tu B'Shvat to be an evening of celebration of our connection to the natural world, but also of asking some of those questions is, I think, a really lovely way to connect it to the agricultural cycle, which I think inherently it is connected to.
Interesting. Um, what are you about you mentioned you're supporting interfaith work. How do you see what have you been doing in that sphere? How do you see that playing out? Are the world's religions coordinated, or is that a priority for in mainstream religious circles at all?
It's a great question, Jay. And I want to say that it's a really good question and it's something that we're thinking about at the moment. There is a history of religious environmentalism in the last 30, 50, 60 years. Every faith tradition at some level has its own language about the miraculousness of the world and preserving it and protecting it. Um, in the recent period, it was the late Pope who published Laudato Si, 11 years ago, which was his encyclical on climate change, and was a remarkable piece of work. And I want to say, by the way, to anybody who's Jewish, who's on this podcast right now, it's totally worth reading. It's online. You can read it. It's about 50 or 60 pages long. The language is, in one sense, very much Catholic theology, but it's actually a fascinating critique of the world that we live in and a challenge to all of us to live more lightly. So, all of the world's faith communities' traditions have language on them. Increasingly, over the last 50 years, there have been interfaith efforts of different sorts. One of the questions that we're asking right now is what can, could, or should be the way forward on interfaith or multi-faith? And we actually don't know. It's a real question. Rabbi Fred Sherlinder-Dobb is doing some work on this at Adamah. We're supporting that part-time to try and map what's going on, to try and speak to people. I think that historically, a lot of the interfaith stuff has been a version of saying the Torah says protect the earth, the Bible says protect the earth, our tradition says protect the earth. And I think there's some value in that. But I think now in this second quarter of the 21st century, we need to go beyond that. And I think that one of the things that we're most thinking about on the interfaith side is really the question of how you increase the velocity of best practice. In other words, are there models, actual physical models within the Jewish community, like the Jewish Climate Action Work or the Jewish Green Business Network or other things, Adamah, Teva, that actually could be applied, could be in a sense given to other faith communities? Are there models in other faith communities that could be applied within the Jewish community? That's a real question, not a rhetorical question. In Israel, I think there is something parallel going on, not just in a religious interfaith stuff, but for example, in relationship to Israelis and Palestinians. The water is shared, the air is shared, it's one ecosystem, and people are going to have to learn to live together without killing each other, which is very hard. People are very scared. One of the reasons we've been supporting the Arava Institute is that you have there, here is an institution that's an Israeli Jewish nonprofit that was founded by Alon Tal, that was led by David Lehrer from Kibbutz Keturah, is now led by Tarek Abu Hamid, who is a religious Muslim Palestinian who lives in East Jerusalem. And it's been a place where for 25 years, Israeli Jews, Israeli Palestinians, Palestinians, Jordanians have come to stay together because they care about these issues. They haven't always liked each other. They've not always been obvious peaceniks. Some of the Israeli Jews have been quite right-wing. Some of the Palestinians haven't told their families where they were going because they wouldn't approve. And part of what one has seen happen there is that through the shared prism of engaging with the natural world, engaging with climate, engaging with these issues, people have learned how to disagree, but to disagree as friends. They may well in the end agree on certain things, but it's actually much more important to disagree without having to kill each other or wanting to kill each other. I think at its best, a series of environmental and climate issues are capable of bringing people together across difference. That's what's going to be important in faith communities. That's going to be important in other communities of difference wherever it's possible.
I agree. I mean, a couple of years ago, or maybe less, and I was really fortunate to be on a Zoom call. It might have been a hybrid meeting that Rabbi Wittenberg in London, with whom I'm sure you're acquainted, had. There was a gentleman from the Catholic diocese, so I believe was director of environment or sustainability or something for the Catholic diocese. Very, very dedicated environmentalist. Pretty sure his first name was Ed. I'm not sure. He told a very touching story about a woman she said, I can't reduce my carbon footprint because I'm poor and I don't have a car and what can I do? And he told her to plant a tomato plant in her apartment, on her windowsill. And she did. And she and her son learned all about it and grew. And then everybody in the apartment building began growing tomatoes and, reducing their carbon footprint and land use by providing their own food hyper locally. Um, which is my way of saying that you didn't mention the other major monotheistic faiths or the other faiths. Are they in siach? Is there a dialogue going on between Jewish clerics and other clerics about these issues on on any levels?
So I think that there has been. I want to give a shout out to Rabbi Dr. Aaron Ariel Lavi, who probably isn't on this call, but is doing important work on this. Um, Look, I was involved a dozen years ago before some of the cups with really high end. Uh, One particular one that was at Windsor Castle, a really high end multi faith environmental gathering, which was hosted by the late Duke of Edinburgh and Ban Ki moon when he was Secretary General of the UN. And there were religious leaders from
I remember that event.
every religious tradition and ones that one had
Hmm.
never heard of. Um, there's no question that that has happened. There's no question it's continuing in different places. The question is how and how to what end and how do we sharpen things? The next COP is going to be in Turkey. We had led a high end group to UAE, to Abu Dhabi in September. And we were there at the Abrahamic Faith Pavilions, which are quite remarkable, which are established there, a mosque, a church, and a synagogue established by the royal family in Abu Dhabi. And I'm intrigued to wonder, could one create a version of that at the next COP in Turkey? Could one create an interfaith place with the COP to try and drive some of these conversations forwards? I think that that's worth thinking about. I think we're thinking about that ourselves, but I think it I think it is important to not go too high into theory, as it were. I think the questions that are of interest to us, I think the sort of work that we want to support, the sort of work that SPNI, I think, has been doing and moving to, are the questions of not what does the Torah say, what does the faith tradition say, but how does one animate things in the real world? I think SPNI was involved in Gazelle Valley in Jerusalem, and it was one of the
Hmm.
last pieces of land that was going to be developed.
Hmm.
And SPNI was involved in causing it not to be developed and creating that park. But it actually wasn't just SPNI, it was actually SPNI and a whole bunch of the people who were living there who really said it's not okay. One of my Amanda Lind, I think, was quite involved in that, some other folks. And
Hmm.
I think that there were folks there who did to Bishvat and said, oh, this is not just fruit and nuts. Let's look outside the window and see whether 3 years from now there is a park there or there is a new development. And I think that actually grounding things locally is sometimes at least as important as some of the larger things.
That's a great point. And doing things as apropos doing things locally, there's a question about, and I'm sure this is something which you've worked on, which Adamah probably has handy, a helpful summary of how and what we can do actions.
So I think there are loads of things nowadays. I mean, there's stuff on the Adamah website, but nowadays you can go to any AI and say, this is where I am, this is where I am on planet Earth. I am this kind of age. My kids are this kind of age, my parents are that kind of age. It's going to be Tu B'Shvat next Sunday evening. I want 5 ideas for what we could do. I want 5 ideas for what we could eat and drink. I want 3 things that we could do locally. And it's remarkable that one can ask those questions now anywhere, and we should. The most important thing is not the specific advice or exactly what you do. It is, I think, actually taking the decision to do it with friends and family, taking the decision for yourself to learn a little bit about Tu B'Shvat, taking the decision to make it real. Have it be like your actual meal next Sunday evening, right? And then think about what is one way that we want to make a difference in the world coming out of this. And that could also be, encouraging one's local synagogue or day school to do more, could be inviting somebody in from SPNI to come and speak or Adamah. Like it is taking that first step that I think is the most important thing.
I love that. That is very important. And just switching the subject a little bit, we have maybe 5 minutes. I just we didn't get a chance really to talk about. You mentioned the third point of your what the JCT was about was global impact or wider impact. And I know that you also, at least theoretically, are looking at the startup ecosystem in Israel and actual startup innovations and not just what NGOs are doing. Is that moving along? Are you finding things? That
So
is
I
the
think there's
typical Israeli answer for, yeah, we're only 0.00% of the globe, but our innovations are going to, impact
so
hugely.
first of all, I think that that's legit. We've worked with the Climate Solutions Prize, which Jeff Hart founded, to bring people over to actually meet with some of the startups and learn there. We're interested in this of scaling. I think it's one of the things again, and I would also say, personally, I was one of the people who was involved quite early on with Arava Power, which Yossi Abramovitz founded at Kibbutz Keturah, and that has grown since then. I think there are a growing number of people who would say, wearing one hat, I give tzedakah, I'm involved in nonprofits, I support my shul, whatever it is, but who would also say, okay, if I have a certain amount of savings or investments, I wanna, I want to make money, want to do whatever, but I want to find ways to be in things that are going to make things better and not worse. And I think that's legitimate and exciting and interesting. The larger questions on the private sector, again, are still questions. The jury's out. There is some evidence for success in Israel in terms of the climate tech startup space. The Innovation Authority has done amazing work, a whole bunch of people. And there are some questions about scale and what is possible and where there is strength. And if we can find ways to accelerate things there, we're interested in doing that.
Absolutely. I just want to mention there's never been a more interesting, vibrant chat on our webinars than there is tonight, Nigel. David Amichai at home doing back office. I forget, are we able to save all of these chats? I know they don't appear in our when we put them online, but can we save the chat, David? Because
Yes, absolutely. We can have a transcript of all the chats, and that's not a problem.
I want to send that to Nigel. Maybe he can send it to his friends. People have been talking about their exploits over the decades in this field, and it's very historic. I feel very honored to have hosted you tonight, Nigel, and you brought along your friends and colleagues. I feel in some ways Alon Tal was here. He is another one of my environmental heroes. I know Alon and have met him in Stanford recently. He's got a lot of crucial ideas that have been also mentioned here on the chat. And I don't know, it was very fun for me. Any final thoughts or things you?
I really want to say thank you. I want to say Tu B'Shvat Sameach to everybody. I want to say I started off by saying that my late father died actually on Tu B'Shvat. And so I gave a little gift to SPNI to plant a kind of tree, hopefully two trees in Jerusalem in two different places. And I thank you for this conversation, and honestly for the work that both Haganah Teva is doing in Israel and the people who are supporting it at a distance, and Bahatzlacha in the future.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the work you've done throughout your career in Adamah and Hazon and Teva, which got involved there at some point or merged with. Nili Simchai was an old friend. Um, and to see you now at the Jewish Climate Trust, an organization upon which we all have great hopes. Appreciate very much the philanthropists who have banded together to put their to put a spotlight and to put their own fingerprint on this hugely important issue. We see climate change and nature preservation as two sides of the same coin, but working both on mitigation and adaptation, we think are crucial. It's been great to work with the JCT over the last couple of years. Looking forward to future stuff, and we will. You're getting a lot of thank yous on this chat, but we'll make sure you get the chat. People have asked how you can sign up for next week's webinar that we do. I don't know if you had this link, then you should have a link to us, Society for Protection of Nature in Israel, or called Nature Israel in the States. You can find us online, and we have all our events and upcoming webinars and some live events in the States coming up. I'll be speaking at BJ in New York on Shabbat, February 14th. You don't even have to come to services if you just want to come at 12:45. And I'm around. We're around in Israel and in general. Nigel is always around, traveling between three continents, and So glad that we managed to get this together for this night. I hope you enjoy your Tu B'Shvat Seder next week. In Israel, there are webinars at 8 p.m. Maybe that'll be after your Tu B'Shvat Seders here. But in abroad, in the States at least, we'll get you in the morning of Erev Tu B'Shvat. So thank everybody for such active participation on the chat. Appreciate it very much, Nigel. Thank you, David, at home in Jerusalem. And everybody can find us online. If you have any questions or need to address anything to Nigel, we're here. So thank you very much. Laila Tov, Chag Sameach.